Greetings everyone, in this video we're going to be painting up Arjac Rockfist, and I'll be sharing some advanced pre-weathering techniques, some OSL and also an alternative colour scheme for the Spacewolves. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that pre-weathering technique. Now this is based off the soft pressing technique. It's not entirely the soft pressing, but it's just something that I do quite often with my miniatures, just to give them that little bit more of a battle-worn look that's in scale with their armour. So the first thing to do once you've assembled your miniature is prime it up in whatever colour primer that you desire. It can be pink, blue, green, whatever colour you like. It really doesn't matter at this stage. Essentially what's going to happen is, because we've got a layer of primer on there, what we're going to do is begin to scratch through it, and then what that'll do is it'll create these tiny little marks and scratches and indentations on the miniature that when we prime back over it will be a physical indentation on the miniature. Now I know we could go in there with scalpels and actually do it to the plastic, but doing it this way, because we're only scratching through a very tiny thin micron layer, that everything's going to be a little bit more in scale than actually creating some physical marks and indentations on the plastic. So like I said, we've primed our miniature up. I've given it around 15 minutes to dry, and then I'm coming with, I've used an airbrush needle, but anything like a sharp tool like this, nothing too heavy or abrasive, but something like, even like a paper clip would work perfectly for this situation as well, but as long as it's a very light tool. Now you've got to be as light as you can with this as well. It doesn't matter if you do scratch into the plastic slightly, that's not really an issue, but light touch is key for this technique. Now what I tend to do is hold the needle at the back end or towards the center, and what that'll do is it just allows the weight of the tool to be enough pressure for those scratches. Now take your time with this stage. This is where you want to spend quite a bit of time just not rushing around it and just like whacking it and just leaving loads of little marks here and there. Just be very mindful of where you're placing these scratches. So for me, around the lower legs or any places that are going to be more exposed to dints and scratches like the edges, and again it just creates those microscopic marks that when we prime back over it, it's going to be a physical, very small in scale indentation. But just pay attention to places like the actual shield. That's where I'm going to add some scratches, as though people have been hitting him and it's left a slight little mark on his armor. Once you've completed that stage, you can then come back in with a primer. Preferably at this stage you might want to do it black. I've gone for brown because I was originally going to do like a bit of a rust undertone, but I changed my mind. But again, the color underneath doesn't really matter at this stage. Preferably something dark like a black or a really dull grey or even a brown. So as I said right at the beginning, we're going to do an alternative colour scheme for the Spacewolves. I wanted something that, you know, was a little bit like the 40k light or dark blue colour, but also paid homage to the original Horus Heresy grey. And that's why I've chosen the colour recipe for this miniature. So the first colour is from 2 thin coats, and it's a nice darkish blue. And, you know, all colour matches will be in the description below. So I'm going to put a paint list below, and it's just a case of taking those colours and looking for the colour matches. If you've got alternative paints, especially with the 2 thin coats range, they tend to replicate what Citadel have done, and in my eyes the 2 thin coats ones are a little bit better than the Citadel paints. So I've just got this first layer, this nice darkish cold grey blue tone, and I just work my way around the miniature, just base coating out all the armour sections in this colour. You'll notice I have got the shoulder pauldron off on one side. I was going to do this black originally, and I think I did paint it, but once I'd completed everything it sort of just blended in with everything else. But just work your way around with this colour, and depending on what you want to do with your shoulder blades, if you want one to be an orange colour, you can do that if you desire. For the subsequent highlight layers, I've chosen those two colours that you've just seen on screen. And how I'm going to do this, first of all, I'm going to mix those two colours together in a 50-50 ratio. And if you've never used Tamiya paints, they're absolute dream to work with through an airbrush, but you do need their thinner for those paints as well. Again, you know, if you're wanting to follow this colour scheme, there will be alternative colour matches that you can grab to be able to achieve something similar without going out and grabbing these Tamiya paints. I just love how smooth they go through, and then they just, you know, just apply it especially for the subsequent highlights. Now, as for the first layer that we're going to add is those two colours mixed together in a 50-50 ratio, and then the lighter grey, we're just going to use that on its own for the final highlights. Now, when it comes to highlight placement, a lot of people might struggle. You could just go for something very simple like a zenithal highlight. What I tend to do is just hold my model under a lamp, see where that light source is catching the miniature, and then just aim the airbrush at those stages and just come in and hit it. For the final highlights, I'm only going to pay special attention to those really bright areas. So that would be the shoulder pauldrons, the shield, and the areas around the top of his head, and maybe a little bit of his knee. And this will just give us some nice light and shadows on our miniature. We are purposely going to be aiming a little bit brighter than what we want the final results to do, because we are going to knock this back quite far. We're going to be knocking, it's going to be really bright and highlighted. You might look at the miniature and think, oh gosh, that looks a bit strong on the highlights. That's purposeful, because by the time we've done the weathering steps, it's going to knock it right back into the colour that we originally desired. Now, if you do make any mistakes and you want to knock it back slightly or introduce some more shadows, you can go back to the original colour that we first placed on. Or if you want to even push that cold tint even further, like what I've done here, I've just loaded up some Collier greenshade into my airbrush and just fired this into the shadows and some of those highlights that I didn't want to be too bright or just knock back very slightly. And again, because it's got that cold tone to it, it's going to push it more into that original 40k blue colour. Now at this stage, I've gone in there and just blacked out the undergarments, what they have under their armour, and also used some rhinox hide to paint out the tabard on his, like the little skirt piece that he's got at the front. Whilst I've got that rhinox hide out, I'm now going to add some sponge chipping to the armor sections. Again, like we did right at the beginning with the pre-weathering and the scratches and stuff, we're just going to pay attention to those areas that are naturally going to be dinged up a little bit more, which would be the lower half, especially his legs, his shield, and any moving parts like the elbows where we would naturally be exposed to like scrapes and dins. Now, if you're wondering what this little grabber tool is that I've got, these are available on Amazon. They are extremely cheap. I think I picked up a pack of 3 of them for around, like, I think it were about £3 to £5 here in UK, and they're basically called jewelry or piercing ball holders. They've got these little claws that come out when you press a button on the back of the pen, and that'll grab whatever item it is. So it's really good for kit bashing or just holding items, but it's really good for grabbing that sponge, and you can just come in and add your sponge chipping to the miniature. Now, once we've done that sponge chipping, and what I'm going to do is grab some Iron Warriors from Citadel and just go inside just a very few select few areas and just add some metallic highlights to those bits, as though it's gone right down to the actual silver armor piece and the metal, and it's just going to add a little bit of visual interest to the model when someone picks it up and looks at it. Again, that is a little additional optional step if you require. For the golden trim or the bronze trim sections on the Spacewolves, I've used a Scale 75's decayed metal, and then given these a highlight of 2 thin coats, battle axe bronze. This is just a Runlord brass equivalent, so if you've got that lying about, just use that. It's the same colour. And then, as I previously mentioned in the video, all the metallic sections were given that base coat of Iron Warriors and then a dry brush of rung fang steel over the top of them. But at this stage, you just want to go through your miniature, make sure you've got any little details base coated out, such as the, like on his shoulder pauldron, he's got a white, so I've just came in there with a grey first, and then added a little bit of white just to finish those off. And if you've got any leather trim sections, you can go in there and paint them with your favourite brown. And I also gave them a little highlight of hull red, which included his hammer or his axe, whatever it is. Well, it's a hammer, isn't it? It's a Thor hammer, his hammer, and they were just giving a highlight of the hull red as well. The little gemstones, you can either go over these, paint them white and go over them with your favourite colour, which might be a contrast paint, or Citadel do offer like a glossy, like a gemstone colour, and that's the colour that I've used for them as well. So at this point we should have all the miniature apart from his head all base coated out and painted out, ready for some weathering. So for the first stage of weathering, I'm going to do something that I don't normally do in my videos, and that's give the entire miniature a coat of gloss varnish. Now, I don't normally do this or advise this with enamels. You know, if you've got a delicate or soft enough touch, then just using them on their own atop of the acrylics is absolutely fine. But just for this purpose, I did want more of a pin wash with the option for things to be a little bit dirty. So that's the reason I've done a gloss varnish on this miniature. And because gloss varnish has more of a capillary action, it's going to allow those thinner enamel washes to run directly into the crevice areas, and then when I come in and wipe away any spillage or any parts that might have bled out a little bit, that's just going to allow me to clean them up really easy and keep everything as more of a clean pin wash. If you want more of a dirtier, grimy look, you could just do this without the gloss varnish. But for the actual pin wash itself, I have used Villainy Ink Decrepit Filth. This is one of their new phase 2, which is not available just yet to the public. If you did, when you were, you know, for the pre-launch and the test kits, if you did manage to pick this up, then use it. Failing that, there are a ton of other lines that do offer these black or really dark brown enamel washers, and you could even do this with an oil paint if desired, something like Abtelung 502 Smoke. Thin it right down with some mineral spirits into a wash consistency, and then come in and start to apply it to your miniature. And it's just a case of loading some up on your brush, just tapping that area, and because it's got that gloss varnish on, it's just going to go whoop and just directly run into those areas without that little silly sound effect that I did. But we'll work your way around the miniature. Give that enamel around 15 minutes to dry. You can use a blow dry to speed up that process, and then using a Q-tip or a sponge slightly moistened with mineral spirits, it's going to reactivate those enamels or oils, allowing us to wipe away any spillages and just make sure everything is nice and neat in those areas. At this point as well, this is where you're going to see some darkening of the armor due to that wash, and this is why I said it's going to start and knock everything back that little bit. Immediately after that, we're going to come in and do some oil dot filtering. Now, the colours for this is entirely up to you. I've just got some oil paints that are rust tones and one that's a little bit brighter, the Abtelung 502's Dust. Again, all these paints are in the description below. Now, oil dot filtering is a way to tint and shift the colour of the armour. It'll add some streaks to it and overall just create a lot of visual interest and also weather the miniature. So it's just a case of loading up those different little bits of oil in and around your miniature, just applying some random dots of different colours all around the miniature. Then I'm going to get a clean brush and just very slightly moisten it with mineral spirits, and using an up and down motion with the brush and a swishing, as though we're going to turn these into streaks. Just immediately start to come in and brush those streaks, blend them together, turn some into some streaks, and this is what's going to shift and add a little bit more of that visual interest to your armor. Now, once all that stage has been completed and those oils have had a little bit of time to dry, around 20 minutes to 30 minutes to dry, I can immediately then come in, because we want to get rid of all that gloss and everything now with the armor and seal everything in place. I'm going to get some matte varnish and just apply a couple of thin coats of matte varnish to the entire miniature. Now you might be thinking, you know, oh, what if it's going to dull my metallics down? And sometimes it does do that. So it's just a case of coming in with a additional highlight color that you did for your armor and your silver sections. If you want to just brighten them up that little bit more, you can do that at this stage after the matte varnish. The head section for this miniature is quite a simple recipe, and I always love to use an airbrush for my flesh effects as it's really smooth like skin is. I've started off with a base coat of Bugman's Glow, so all the skin sections are painted in Bugman's Glow, and you can do this via brush if you desire, and just use a dry brush to, you know, for your highlights. But then from a zenithal, using Flayed One Flesh, I've just come in from above, and then that's going to leave the Bugman's Glow in the shadows and to one side where the shadow would be, and then I'm going to get my highlights from the Flayed One Flesh as well. After that's dried, it's very simple. All I do is come in with Citadel's Targor Ray Shade Wash and just apply some of this around the eyes and the mouth section. And then if you're feeling brave, just get a very thin brush and just dot of white in each eyeball, and then for the teeth as well. I did freehand the tattoo on the side of his head. It didn't turn out the best, but I was trying to film it on camera. It didn't quite work out, and it involved a lot of swearing, so I didn't film that bit. But if you're feeling brave enough, you could just go in there and freehand a bit of a tattoo on his head. Now for the beard, for that I just came in and just base coated it out in black, and then using a mix of some dark browns and then mixing them with some greys for the highlights, just dry brushed on some very soft highlights, and that's pretty much it for the head. For the OSL glow on his hammer, it's a really simple recipe. I just come in with my airbrush, sprayed some white sections in for the glow sections. This is also going to be like almost a primer for the colour that we're going to apply, whether it be a blue, an orange, whatever you want. This will work with any colour, but just come in with your white and just paint and spray those sections in white for the glow. Then grab any contrast paint color that you want, for your glow to be. For this, I've used Citadel's Contrast Frost Heart, and then apply that over the white sections that we've just done to create the glow effect. And because we've got that white down, it'll be nice and bright. And then after that, it's just a case of coming back in with your white right at the central point of where the glow is coming from, and just hit it with a little bit more white. Now, some little tips around this. Obviously, I've lowered the pressure in my airbrush to around 15 psi and come in really close with a 0.2 needle and nozzle. It can be done with bigger needles. You've got to get in close and make sure that you've thinned your paints correctly. And then I also did a little bit of glow on the base as well. Now, as a final little addition, just to make those center points pop a little bit with the symbols that he's got on his hammer, I thinned down with a brush some of that white paint and just dotted it in to those sections so that it runs in it, and it'll just make everything pop and glow that little bit more. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this tutorial. If you're wanting to know how I achieved this snowy base, I've done a previous Spacewolves video here on this channel where I explain the full process and break everything down with all the different products on how I achieved this snowy base, so make sure you do check that out as well. I do have some alternative color schemes and videos for both brush application and airbrush application on this channel as well, which I'll link in the description below. And whilst you're down there, you will notice that I do have some affiliate links, so if you do want to pick up some of the products from this video or some paint, then you can just click on them, order whatever it is that you're ordering, and I get a little bit of a kickback from that, and it's the best way to support me and this channel. I'd like to thank you all for coming along and watching this video, and if you are interested, if you do want to support me even further, I've got some links below as well for like buy me a coffee and all that sort of good stuff. And also in there are some links, because this is an airbrush video. If you're interested in getting an airbrush and you want a really cheap, affordable kit that's perfect for your hobby space, and it's small and compact with the compressor, everything you need all in one box, then check out the links below as well and you'll get 10% off as that. But I'd like to thank you all for coming along, spending your time here and watching this video. Don't forget, I've got my Black Grail course over at the Grimdark Compendium now available, with the first episode available on their channel. So if you could just jump over there, I'll leave a link. Go and check that out as well and support me over at the Grimdark Compendium. Thanks again, and I will catch you in my next video.